Do you ever ask yourself, am I playing too small? Have I left it too late to start afresh? Will I come to the end of my life and feel that I somehow let myself down? This is your invitation to hear from some amazing people who have asked themselves those very same questions and chose to wake the F up, to get off the hamster wheel of mediocrity and seize the life that was calling them. Be inspired and be challenged to discover who you have the potential to become and the contribution you're here to make. And now, here to guide you on the most important quest of your life is your host, Janet Hogan.
Meryl Streep, Jodie Foster, Tina Fey, and Tom Hanks are just a handful of celebrities who suffer from this particular syndrome. In fact, as many as 70% of high achievers say it's a real issue for them. That feeling of, who do I think I am? Who am I to be doing this? Also known as imposter syndrome. Now, if you relate to this, you'll really connect with this week's guest, Elyse Crowston. Elyse, welcome to Wake the F Up.
Hi, thank you. Appreciate being here. And of course, through the magic of Zoom and working from home, we have some sounds in the background. So I apologize if that comes in and out.
Yeah, a little bit of ambulance siren sound effect just to emphasize what we're saying. Yeah. Now, you've had a pretty unconventional career path in your own words. Just share with us, what are you doing now? Tell us a little bit about what that's about.
So right now is a wonderful time in my life, and I'm very happy to say that emerging out of the COVID pandemic, it's actually been an incredibly exciting time. So I am now the VP of Operations for Active Impact Investments. We're based in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, and we deploy capital with 64 million under management now. We deploy capital into early and seed stage businesses that have climate tech solutions that can hopefully change the planet and ensure our sustainable prosperity going into the future.
Yeah, so I love hearing that, you know, these impact organizations are cropping up and people are actually having a really a valid choice when it comes to investing funds. Now, just taking a little step back from that, climate change was always something on your mind, wasn't it? Right from the, from your earlier years. Can you tell us a little bit about that when you were in your student years?
As somebody who's kind of perpetually curious and a generalist, the one through line in everything that I've done or that I've endeavored to do has been really in reaction to people's relationship with the planet. I've always, since I could remember, I was appalled that we just treat our planet in a particular way. It never made sense to me that, we have the economy that measures growth in one way, but we do it at the expense of the planet, and that pollution is just an accepted byproduct of economic activity, or, even as something as small and individual as litter is an accepted or, frowned upon, but generally accepted practice in a modern society. So it's something that I've always been really passionate about. And all through school, I would take every opportunity to gear a project towards something that was an environmental proclamation, even in, jobs while I was in university or in high school. I was always the person who was, overly fixated on turning off the tap, things like that, like these individual actions. But it was in university that I decided, I want to gear my career towards that is more mass action. How do we, individual choices is not going to necessarily change the planet. And in fact, that's almost a misnomer, but we have to take collective action, and doing that in your career is one of the largest ways that you can act for climate change.
Yeah. So if I were to look at your life career-wise, it seems like there's always been this very consistent thread between what you were passionate about, as a student and then at college, and what you're doing now. So it intrigues me why imposter syndrome plays a role in your life now. So I know, given that so many people in this achievement space feel the same way as you do. I'd love to dig into that a little bit more. Where do you think that comes from? What is that about, Elyse?
I think it's because being passionate about something and being really good at fundamental skills that are highly valued in society isn't always connected. My personal attributes that come naturally are speaking with people and almost as like a sales oriented person, but I didn't want to work in a conventional sales career. I wanted to work in something that is geared towards climate change. So there was kind of an incongruity between how I wanted to apply my skills and like the natural path that those skills were taking me. And so in university, I set my sights upon doing my thesis in freshwater governance and politics, because I'm very much a qualitatively inclined person. I'm better with words than with numbers. And in fact, I had to very kind of strategically gear my elective and required studies in university to stay away from a lot of quantitative things and high maths, because it's not my natural skill set. So when I was in university working in freshwater, and then I also minored in Mandarin languages, I thought that I would be working in cross-border politics and, how can we protect water resources? This is a hot topic, and especially in Canada, but also in Australia and around the world, and increasingly so. So from university, I came across an organization called EcoJustice, which is Canada's largest environmental law charity. And they also do the only comprehensive freshwater audit within our country. So one of the things in Canada that we're granted is that we have an abundance of fresh water available to us. But we also don't realize that the laws that govern that fresh water are extremely tenuous or non-existent. So I almost forced myself upon this charity as a fourth year university student, basically showed up and said, I'll do whatever job you have available, which led me to the fundraising department. So I was at the nexus of fundraising and communications. And I was with EcoJustice for 4 years. And that was partly because I thought I might want to go into environmental law. And I quickly found out that my kind of, a lot of the renegade aspects of my personality are not well suited to a conservative institution like the law. But it was also at EcoJustice that I got to dive into a lot of different aspects that I care about. And the critical inflection point for me in my career was, at the same time with EcoJustice campaigning against fossil fuel infrastructure or neonicotinoid pesticides, all of these things that are harmful to the planet, my partner and I we were getting our first mortgage. And this was at the time of the Northern Gateway Pipeline and the Standing Rock process in the Dakotas in the States. And I found out through multiple different channels that the mortgage that we were signing up for, and any mortgage that that was available to us on the market, was invested in all of these things. So here I am in my day-to-day life thinking that I'm helping be part of the solution and fighting these things that are destroying the planet. But my personal finances were inevitably going to be perpetuating these same things. So I decided from there that I wanted to move to the business side of sustainability. Like, how do we change the economic incentives towards being more sustainable, as opposed to punishing polluters, which is what the lawyers at EcoJustice do. And it's a very necessary aspect of it, but I wanted to move into how do we change economic systems and value propositions to be more sustainable? How can it be the most profitable thing to be the most sustainable thing? And so going back to your question about how imposter syndrome comes into this, is now I'm trying to work in finance, which is the exact opposite of what my natural inclination was in university. So I'm coming from a unconventional background into a industry that I never really thought that I would work in. And so, now fast forward a number of years, from EcoJustice, I went to Renewal Funds, which is the largest mission venture capital firm in Canada. And I can go into how the imposter syndrome seeds grew from there. But from there into another fund, and then landing now at Active Impact Investments, working in venture capital and the finance industry and how that advances sustainability. So it's been kind of a full circle journey. Yeah.
And what I'm hearing though, that is, I mean, through your behavior, you show, a lot of integrity. If we take the word integrity to mean, how you think, feel, and do are all in alignment. And so seeing where the real problem was, have you found your niche in your current position? So even though it's in the context of finance, have you found the thing that you do that, that you're good at, where your natural talent lies? Or are you surrounded by numbers all day? Just give us a little bit of a picture of that.
Very happy to say that it is the form of growth of this sustainable impact investing industry has occurred. There is definitely almost a glut of people who have come through the traditional commerce and business streams, whether it's like a Bachelor of Commerce or an MBA, who want to use their talents, valiantly towards something that is more meaningful. But there is less people like myself who have a very different perspective and skill set, and putting those two personalities and, putting that all together really makes a firm more strong. So absolutely, I feel like I have very much found my niche, which is in communicating and strategy and like process and logistics and figuring out how different stakeholders fit together. And also, like, a big part of my role is helping those people who are much more quant minds do their work better by enabling systems and processes that, everything from like automation to culture and all of the things on the human side. So I have built out a niche by running into a lot of walls and reiterating. I once was described by a partner at Renewal Funds as one of those, like a used car dealership where they have like inflatable men to like get attention. Like,
I love
when they fall, when they fall down, they immediately get back up. That's how I was described as, the person. Sorry.
No, that's great. That's a great trait, resilience. Yeah.
Yeah. Being tenacious to the point of annoying, but not really letting it get you down when you kind of come across something that is, less than amazing feedback.
Yeah. Well, what I'm hearing, Elyse, is that you do have amazing perseverance, and I see perseverance comes directly from passion. If you're not passionate about something, you're not going to be that little inflatable man constantly popping back up. And it's interesting, the whole concept of imposter syndrome, because I know, the work I do, which is taking people to their shadow side, finding out what fears sit beneath the surface. You could argue might require a psychology degree, but I never went to university and did a psychology degree. I mean, I spent 20 years in advertising, which is probably a similar initiation, but not a scientifically based one. But I feel that maybe for those of us who are coming at a problem from a different angle, because we really care about it and we're fascinated by it, that maybe that liberates us to see it in a whole new light, that lends something to the problem that wouldn't otherwise be there. Do you know what I mean? So that even though, because we all doubt ourselves at some time, don't we? That's pretty normal. But I kind of feel blessed by the fact that my ideas weren't stymied or blinkered by traditional thought or by having to follow a particular set of rules. And I wonder if that's a little bit the same for you, that in your field, you're coming from a totally different angle, a more humanistic one. And if you were just another, numbers person in the team, you probably wouldn't be making the impact that you're making now. How do you feel about that?
Thank you. Yeah, it's very astute, and that rings a lot of bells. It does. And but the other side of it is it can be a little bit of a lonely space. I mean, you have to stick yourself out there. One person saying something different in a room, it might feel odd, or you don't feel like doing it that day, but there is a lot of value and a lot of strength. And especially when you find a team, as I'm really happy to say that I have, that really leans into people's differences and sees them as adding extra value. You know, we're greater than the sum of our parts because we encourage some dissent and all voices making themselves heard. So that means a lot to me.
Yeah, it's interesting actually that you said that you sometimes feel like it can be a lonely space, because I remember I did a bit of acting back in the day, and it was interesting to note that when they pulled out people who suffered from imposter syndrome, a lot of them were in the acting field. And I remember one of the key aspects of being an actor is that it's just you and maybe a fellow actor in front of the camera, and you're aware of this room full of people looking at you, all the crew, there's the cameraman, the director, the producer, sometimes the writer, all the gaffers and the grips and the runners. They're all there looking at you. It's a very artificial place to be. And I was very aware of the loneliness of that, being in front of the camera, the isolation of that. And I wonder if that's kind of what you're describing here, that feeling that you've almost been singled out. And I'm just thinking to myself, if that's potentially why some people can feel like imposters, because they don't feel like one of the crowd. Do you think there's anything in that?
I think there's definitely something there. And I think I agree with that, because I feel like I've inadvertently been able, I think, very positively disagree or build on someone's ideas if you have this baseline of like, I really like you, I don't just respect you, but I really like you. And so, for those like myself who feel like they have this imposter syndrome kind of lingering in their guts, one of the things that I would suggest, and I have to remind myself of all the time, is, but these people like you for you. And that maybe is a bit contrary than to some like professional advice, but I think increasingly it's really important for people to find a bit of a tribal aspect in their work, to enjoy the people that they work with at a human level, not just, I go in and this is my profession and I happen to see them. I mean, maybe that's your groove and your personality, but for me, that's just not who I am.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think, whenever we feel ourselves veering off into the fear space, it's usually coming from a sense of disconnection with others, isn't it? That we've kind of lost our way and lost our tribe. And so to come back to that, I think is great advice for someone, feeling that, I'm a bit of a fraud. I shouldn't even be here, because that can possibly be what our brain tells us to tell ourselves if we're feeling that disconnection, that we're in the wrong tribe, in other words. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Absolutely. And that's why it's sometimes the antidote to it as well is, even outside the workplace, like having those old friends who really know who you are, who can sometimes remind you when you forget, like sometimes I think about friendship, like really, really true and deep friendship is being almost like a savings account that you have to make withdrawals on sometimes when things get tough. You're building this friendship capital, and sometimes like you need them to tell you or remind you really like who you are, so you can build up that confidence to be that valiant imposter and, rub their noses in it.
Well, in my book, the real imposters are those who pretend they care and don't. So, and that was me for most of my life. In fact, in the advertising agency where I used to work, I was called the nice girl. And then someone said to me later, "Oh, Janet, do you know what NICE stands for?" And I said, "No." They said, "Nothing inside me cares enough." And I went, "Oh my God, that was like a punch in the guts, because I was just walking through the paces of my life. I wasn't really passionate about the work I was doing, although now I see the value of advertising from a psychological perspective relating to the work I do now. But that, numbing yourself out, which is what so many people in the workspace do, they really are just sleepwalking their way through life in a job that they feel they have to have because, there might be the reality that you've got to put roof overhead and food on the table, but also maybe it's because it's a high status job. And so they're going into it for the wrong reason. But, the fact that that you're pulled towards something because you feel that you're making a difference says to me that's the opposite of being an imposter. The imposter is someone who puts a mask on because they're trying to be someone that they're not. And I see in you someone who's absolutely wanting to be who you are, and it might just feel a bit uncomfortable sometimes though because you're in a context. It's the context that's changed, not really you. So
that's true. Yeah, a lot. And thank you. But when you really care so much, from a cellular level about something, and it's what you want to be doing, there is in the back of your mind, like, am I good enough?
Yeah.
Because I want the best people in the world working on climate change. Like we need an all geniuses on deck. This is a big problem, the biggest problem. So to be able to make my living in this space it's incredibly humbling, and I'm so, so grateful. I just hope that I, good enough.
Yeah. Well, that's it's interesting that thought is pretty much, again, it's within us, and this really speaks to the work that I do actually, because I see that these negative narratives for some people just become overwhelming, and it actually does stop them moving ahead with their lives or thinking that they can make a difference. And so, it is really important to address that. Also, because life throws at us things that we don't expect, and curveballs. Look at the curveball of COVID, and the bigger curveball of the climate crisis, which is it's a much broader curve and a much longer time span. But these times are both, I find, terrifying and also exhilarating all at once. That. We are given this challenge that is so visible now. It's tangible. It's moved past the point of refuting it or questioning it, and so now it's really an invitation, like humanity's potentially never had before, to step up, but in a way that is based on our individual skills. What we do. What particular problem can we solve? Because the problem in and of itself is way too big for any single person to address, but it's a symptom of many, many, many other issues, countless issues. So which one of those issues could I address? But the other thing too, that aside, is that life throws us curveballs all the time, doesn't it? You shared with me when we last spoke, Elyse, about something that happened to you on a personal level that really rocked your boat as well. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah. So earlier this year, coming up on a year ago, my partner of a long time, we were really happy we got pregnant. And that was all seeming like it was the ideal time, despite it being a pandemic. This was also like, naive September 2020 when we thought that the pandemic would be over in the coming spring. So it's like, our due date is in June, no problem. We're going to be able to see the grandparents and everything. So little did we know. But in November, we found out that we lost the baby. So we had a miscarriage at 3 months. It was horrible and devastating. And through that process, it was also incredibly isolating because we were in a pandemic. So you can't have that rush in of physical community. I mean, people were around us, but people also didn't know that not everybody knew that we were pregnant. In fact, very few people knew that we were pregnant because conventional wisdom, quote unquote, tells you that because the prospect of a miscarriage is so likely that you're not to tell other people that you're pregnant. So as you can hide the fact that you miscarry. Without maybe going down that rabbit hole, I do not recommend this method. And part of the reason that I'm open to speaking with you about it now in this very public forum is that it's, the other thing that I learned in this process is just how common it is for couples to experience miscarriage. And since then we had another, so we have two on our belt. But it's really common. But I also don't think it's shameful. It's this thing that we need to hide, and in particular hide from our professional lives. Like it really touched me when New Zealand was the first country to give a bereavement benefit to their citizens for miscarriage. But then it was also this like, what moment of like that being special, when you hear about something that is good and you're like, but why is that special? Like, you lose a child just because they haven't been born yet doesn't mean that it hurts you any less. And as the person who physically had the miscarriage, I can say that it hurts a great deal, and that there would have been no way for me to just hide it from the world or carry on my normal day-to-day life. Like, this was an emotional catastrophe, but a physical, really difficult ordeal. Like I said, we were at 3 months. So, the other upside of having a purposeful career and people that are all dedicated to the same kind of goodness and bestowing goodness upon the world is that I felt, I was at a different firm at the time during the first one, and I felt completely comfortable speaking to my boss and colleagues about what I was going through, and that I needed space, and they gave me more space than I knew I needed at the time, but really, really did need. And, having a workplace, just like having a friendship community that supports you as a whole person, is really, really important, especially, and that's not gender specific necessarily, but yeah, the physical aspects of it are like, there's a lot of layers to it. And even at the time that it was happening, my current employer, I was doing consulting work for them. And I told them too, like, this is why I need some time. I've had a miscarriage. And, my now current boss called me immediately and, shared things from his personal life. And I feel like for me, it was a bonding exercise. And it was one of the reasons that I wanted to come over to Active Impact so strongly. It was this kind of whole human approach that they take to that comes from Mike, from our founder, and it really permeates through our entire culture. But it's hard to have that kind of personal stuff, kind of that monkey on your back, as you're trying to advance your career and your aspirations and all of the other existential threats of the planet.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And it reminded me, I had 2 miscarriages too, and it's interesting the role shame can play in that. It's almost like a sense of failure, like somehow, what did I do wrong? What could I have done differently? And we go down that crazy rabbit hole. But as I was hearing you speak, it reminded me of a conversation I had with someone else the other day, and we were talking about, it's interesting how things have shifted from wanting to have balance between our private and public life, or family life and work life, to harmony or integration, how things are changing. Because balance, when you think about it, it's like 2 ends of a seesaw, and one will always be higher than the other kind of thing. There's very rarely perfect equilibrium, and doesn't that, if anything, just perpetuate an idea of duality? But in this instance, when we talk about harmony or integration, it's like, why would you keep this information that's so important to me from my work colleagues? I'm going to create disharmony if I do that. The harmony comes from actually being able to be open and vulnerable and connected and saying what's on our mind. Yeah, I think you were saying that created a sense of bonding. I think that's so important. That's really what has been missing from the equation. I remember in my own personal experience, the doctor was very, very dismissive, like it was nothing. And I was lying there going, but this isn't just like a medical procedure now that we're going through. This is almost like the termination phase, no one's acknowledging it. No one's talking about it. So I'm really
It's horrible.
Yeah, it really is. And for so many different reasons, we are essentially optimistic beings, most of us. And I think we do also project forward and we imagine life with this, this little person that we've created, that is purely, totally miraculous, So of course we're going to be invested emotionally in that. So when that's taken away, it's not just like a balloon popping, it's something that devastates us from within. And we do
you have
need
to
talk about it.
When you find out you're pregnant, like both parents, you have to get invested in that future. Otherwise you're losing precious time to prepare. Like, or at least that's how I saw it. We don't have kids, but you have to be invested in that idea from the jump, and then to have that just change so dramatically is it's then you have to let that go, and you have to kind of grieve that future that won't materialize. I mean, even though I am perpetually optimistic that we will have a family and we will have kids, it was just not the right time. And getting pregnant and building a human is like the most complicated zipper that has to align itself perfectly, and it doesn't sometimes. And the reality is that that's actually your body doing its job. Like, your body is intelligent by recognizing that like something wasn't going right, so let's try again. And that's the reality of it. And like, it does make me feel a little bit better, but it still sucks. And I hear you about like, there is Canada, like Australia, like I'm forever grateful for our socialized healthcare. Like, there was never a bill. There was never a question of what my care needed, but it is, you do come across a lot of different professionals in an experience like that. And many are wonderful and empathetic, and some are not.
Yeah. No, that's right. What about, Elyse, I'd love to hear your opinion on, there are a lot of people saying, I'm not going to have kids at all. I don't want to bring them into this uncertain future. What do you say to that?
I want to make amazing people who care about the planet and are going to do really great things. The world will always need conscientious and caring and lovely people. And while there's no guarantee, I will do everything I possibly can to make some of those. I understand that worldview and, like the finite resources. So for that reason, I'm not looking to have double digits of children, but I think that you can be conscious of the challenges that society faces, but also like in my career where we're working towards climate solutions and investing in companies that are doing incredible things. Like we also live in a point in society where, contrary to 20 years ago, we now have the solutions that we need. We have the technology that can bring sustainability. We can reduce our energy consumption. We have cheaper, cleaner sources of power. Like, there are regulatory and scale roadblocks to the proliferation of those things, but they exist and we can enact them, and we know what we need to do to solve this crisis. But it's not going to probably happen in a complete way in my lifetime. So I want with my partner, I want to work on the people who are going to continue working on these things.
I love that. I totally agree with that too. And I think heard a lovely exchange between Russell Brand and Marianne Williamson, and she was saying, you got to think of it like the world has been infected, if you like. It's got its own internal virus vis-a-vis how the what's happening to the planet. And so these are the white T cells, the immune system. You've got to build up our immunology to this problem. And that's what every conscious person is. They're a response to building up that immune system, a conscious individual. And we need more of them, not less of them. It's not simply a case of minimizing the world human population. That's not the best strategy.
So, another analogous part to that, I'll just add before we go to the next topic is, and somebody told me this a long time ago when I was still working in the charitable sector at Ecojustice, and I was saying like, these are all the things that I want to do and the solutions I want to be part of, and I don't even care about making a lot of money. I just want to be part of the solution. And she like verbally slapped me and was like, stop it. Like, stop thinking about it that way, because we need good people to have money. Like, you can do good things for the planet and for society and still make a decent living. And in fact, the world is filled with money and wealth, and we need good people to be caretakers of it. We need people to do good things with something that is that can be very easily used for evil. So yeah, I agree with that. And so that's all the more reason to do something meaningful with your career, but not be sheepish about it.
Yeah. Here. All right. So this is a good segue when we're talking about, people who can create change. We have to be conscious, I believe, and as self-aware as possible in order to do that. And I speak from a position of someone who was very unself-aware for most of her life. Like I was pretty much a zombie working through my life, doing things just because I could. And I'm not really denigrating myself there. That was also partly the environment of the time too. It was all about money. That was the mantra back then, work hard, make money, then you'll be happy, in that order. So one of the things that I love doing is helping raise consciousness, so that each of us individually can appreciate who we are and what our particular gift might be, so that we can make the greatest impact in the world in a way that is not self-sacrificial. It's not like going to war and becoming cannon fodder, in a way that serves us. Because if it doesn't serve us, it's not sustainable. We're just going to run out of willpower. It actually has to come from that inner passion. So that's one of the reasons I invite people to take part in the Magic Triangle quiz, which is like a goal-setting exercise, but different from most, where you're going to go into your mental space and ask your fearful mind what it wants more of, which is kind of one of the problems we have in the world, that we buy more than we really need, because that's how we've been wired, to think through our mind what the mind is telling us that we need. And it tends to come from a place of fear and lack. To the intuitive self, which is more about what do I need on a soul level, and that's less likely to be something materialistic and something that genuinely fulfills us, way more than a new handbag or a car. So when I asked you to take part in this exercise, Elyse, and thank you for doing so, you came up with 3 core needs. So what we're going to do is talk to each of these 3 core needs to see the significance that they have for you in your life and your future success. So the 3 needs were playfulness, freedom, and respect. So let's talk about playfulness first. So tell us about why playfulness is so important to you in your life, and have you experienced a lack of playfulness?
Maybe an excess. Because being playful is fun. It's connection. It's intimacy. It's community. Through playfulness, we can forget all of the kind of emperor's clothes, so to speak, of all of the bits of society and what we're supposed to be and what we're told we're not. But being playful is just, it's from your guts. Like, it's just true happiness to me, is like in a state of play.
I love that. Thank you. And I think it's pretty relevant to your area of work as well. So now tell me about freedom. Why did freedom come up as one of the top 3?
And I think those two are linked. It's like feeling free when you're really in like a state of play. But for me, freedom, I grew up feeling very constrained. I felt very like I had to be who other people wanted me to be. I grew up in a pretty high conflict household. My parents separated and divorced in a very ugly way when I was really young. And it was the narrative that really defined my upbringing. And I always wanted to be free of that. I wanted to be able to make my own choices, to be in the place physically that I wanted to be in, but I wanted to be there, because there were so many dynamics at work that were always kind of capitulating to other people's feelings and needs. So freedom for me has been, it's really about defining who I am and feeling empowered to be myself. Like freedom, I don't even take it in like the like the financial aspects of it, though that would be really, really nice to be like infinitely free. But more just like feeling free to be my truest self.
Yeah, thank you. I love that. And I love how you spoke to that lack of freedom too that you experienced as a child. Yeah, and how what I hear there is, those past experiences that were so painful can actually form for us what is really important to us in our adult life. That freedom has a value that it wouldn't have had if you hadn't been through those experiences. So it becomes like a core need, and ultimately probably a core value. So, and then the final one, respect. So share with me about respect, why that came up as the number one core need.
I think it's also aligned with the wanting to do, good. In my career, I want my life to have meaning. I want, the people that we hopefully to create, to say that they're proud of what their mom did and respect like the choices that I made and the impact that I had through my life. But at the same time, I think it's also related to the kind of the impetus for this conversation and imposter syndrome. It's, I want to be of value in the things that I am good at. And I want those having it be of value and have that value respected are connected but different things. And so I think that's, a life's ambition is to find that respect in kind of a macro level.
Yeah, thank you for that. So what's interesting about the triangle is that it comes from your inner self and ultimately speaks to your outer self as well, or describes your outer self or sets the path for it, your how you interact with the world. So let's just look at the inner self first. So knowing that these are needs, in other words, they're like yearnings, and you can trust a yearning because it comes usually from the lack of that, so from some form of pain. And your intuitive self, which knows so much more than we give it credit for, knows intuitively that by fulfilling these needs, your inner world will be healed. We talk about the childhood wound, and it's how we heal that childhood wound is to give that inner child what it needs. So, and it fairly artfully describes your journey for yourself. So you have respect at the top of the triangle. So that's like your vision or your North Star, Elyse. And then the mission is how you achieve it. So in its most simple form, it's through playfulness and freedom that I achieve respect. So let's just translate that. So by being in an environment where you can play, where you can have fun, because that if it's too, straighty 180, it's going to lose you. You're not going to show up for work every day. So there has to be a sense of playfulness, and also freedom to operate as you see fit. I get that, but that by being able to be free to direct your path within that particular place where you're working now or in the future is important to you, to direct your own path, to not be too constrained by rules and regulations, but to be able to do the job as best you can, the best way you can. And then through that, by following that formula, that's when you will achieve respect. So let's say that's an acceptance of the self, that you are doing what you are doing, and not only that, but you're more than capable of it, and making a difference, but with a proviso of not getting too attached to that. But because once we get too attached to an outcome, that can start to kill, freedom and playfulness. So we know that you're here doing what you feel you need to do, but also understanding that you have no control over the final result. So does that make sense? Through playfulness and freedom, you will achieve that respect. Does that work for you?
Yeah, that does. And I think that like respect also feeds back into freedom. Like when you respect someone's ability to freely do the best job, for me, at least, it empowers wanting to perpetually do an even better job. That is a feedback loop. Like when I feel trust from my coworkers or employer, it makes me all the more dedicated. You never want to have a conversation. I never want to have a conversation about how I overextended that freedom or respect. You just want to operate within it and just use it as this fuel to do an even better and more impactful job. Definitely.
Yeah. And it is like a feedback loop. In fact, you can almost see it. The triangle almost becomes one creates the next. So playfulness is the first thing to focus on. That's really the core thing for you right now, is to maintain playfulness in the work environment, because the environmental space can be very serious, a lot of very intense people in that space. So your job in part is to lighten it up. And that's really important for you, because that's what will keep it sustainable. And that's going to give you, as you do that, that'll give you more freedom to operate according to how you operate best. And in turn, that will start to garner not only self-respect, but the respect and attention of others. And as that happens, you're going to keep, everything starts to feed into itself. So the triangle, if you like, if you can imagine it starting to spin at this point, becomes almost circular, like a vortex that's ever expanding. But it's essentially why you can trust this is that it's coming from the pain of not having had, of these things being always a part of you, but in childhood having them taken away. Does that make sense? Yeah, so that's why this is so dear to you. Yeah,
that bit resonates so much, and I wish that more people who care about the environment and want to work in this space knew that you can have so much fun. That with the in between times in my career before I went from renewal funds, when I came from Eco Justice, I went to a retreat center called Hollyhock, and that's a whole other group of stories, but. One of the things that was the biggest takeaway for me is, like, I know a lot of people that do this work, but I don't have a lot of friends that do this work, and finding the fun in this, in environmental sustainability, not just being the person that's like shutting down the conversation by talking about the environment, which I spent plenty of years doing, but having like, life is better over here, like having a purposeful career and feeling like you're doing something that will help sustain life on this planet and having a great time doing it, like Yahtzee, that's the best place to be.
Well, exactly. And that's ultimately how you'll attract more people to your space. And that's ultimately, this is your formula for solving the problem. That's how you'll do it, because let's face it, there's nothing more boring than hearing someone who's into savior syndrome and, ideologically correct. And, they're saying all the right things, but do you want to play with them? Probably not. So this is how you will create change, and it all comes back to yourself. So what's interesting is when you start to really live these, satisfy these needs so they do become core values, essentially you get out of your own way, and that's when you can start really focusing on the others. And this is part of the journey. And so these three core needs now become how you show up in the world from the external perspective. So if you like respect, because it sits at the top of the triangle, it's the most important. The most important thing is always the why. So respect is your why, it's your purpose. So it's what you do is for yourself on a personal level. You want to respect yourself. You want to know that you can make a difference because you've known the lack of that. And then also think about why you would be doing this even in a professional context. Is it, for instance, so that people finally do start to respect these precious resources that we've got, and understand that the health of the planet is not necessarily going to continue regenerating while we continue to disrespect these resources, take them for granted. That respect actually is a value that's very dear to you, that is why you get out of bed in the morning to promote that sense of, we have to cherish what we have, because we won't know how precious it is until it's actually taken away, and we can't let ourselves get to that point. Does that make sense, Elyse? That respect really is that why. You might not necessarily articulate it to a client, but it's your why, and it's basically why you do this work. And then the next core need, the second core need, freedom, is actually the what. So what you give to your clients is freedom. So thinking about it in this space, what could that mean for your clients? What do you think potentially you're freeing them from in your line of work?
Hopefully freeing them from the guilt of having, accumulated wealth from resource extraction. I think as we become conscious to these things, especially in, like the colonial world, you can't unlearn where all of this prosperity came from. It came from the denigration and annihilation of other people and of other species, and of, you know, the climate stability that, you know, our ancestors enjoyed. So I think, you know, in this work, by allowing people to invest in solutions and invest in people who are stewards of that money, who want to make the world a better place, who want to treat people with respect, and, you know, try to remove as much greed and disconnectedness from it, you can help people gain prosperity, but without a lot of that existential guilt.
Yeah.
And it's kind of full circle to what I mentioned about our mortgage. And that was just something that I couldn't unknow. It was, you know, if you can remove the financial mechanisms from all of the things that are harmful, and in our conventional society, we donate to charity to make ourselves feel better, and to like take the things that were extractive and put them into hopefully regenerative things. But if we can break that disconnection by allowing wealth generation in something that is helpful rather than harmful, my hope is that I can alleviate people from guilt.
Yeah. Well, I think that's an enormous gift if you can do that, because guilt, particularly in the Western world, is really hardwired into us. You know, so many of us feel guilty for whatever we've done, actions we've taken, or that we're not deserving. So you might not use the word guilt in your sales spiel, but that's essentially you can talk to, you know, undoing decisions of the past by, you know, you can get into reparation mode, you know. So you'd be inadvertently appeasing guilt that way, but that's essentially what you're doing. You're offering them freedom from guilt. And then the final one is how. So how you do this is through playfulness. So speak to that. How could you see playfulness playing out in the work context?
I think that is, you know, there's the guilt aspect is for people who are, you know, like if you're an investor or you have a lot of wealth and like you can invest in things that are more sustainable and equitable. But also the other aspect of it that I can speak to more in my experience is, you know, in our professional lives, in our lives writ large, we expend so much of our energy towards what we do as a career. And if you can bring playfulness into your career, then you'll have a much more enjoyable life. But if you can bring playfulness to a purposeful career, that to me is like the ideal mix. You know, being able to do something that you believe in, that's doing something good, but have a lot of fun doing it. And for me, and that's another really key piece of the puzzle. We need capital to funnel into this space, but we need the most talented, dedicated humans to dedicate their energies towards these things, whether it's founding a climate focused venture, a solution, founding a nonprofit or an organization. Like, we need people's creative professional energies to come into this space, not because it's necessarily the right thing to do, but because it's way more fun over here.
Yes, I love that. Yes. I think we're through with the serious stuff, aren't we? We're through with being beaten up. I love hearing that. And even, you know, we're seeing generational divides. Like, I'm a baby boomer and, you know, we've copped our end of it too. And it's, I think, to suddenly move out of that space and just go, hey, we're all in this together. We're all equally invested in our future. Doesn't matter how old we are. Let's have fun. Let's have fun solving the problem and showing up. I love that. Thank you so much. So, Elyse, I've really enjoyed this interview. There was one final question I had for you before we wind up. There was a line that you shared when we were talking the other day. We are our ancestors' wildest dreams. Just tell me about that.
Yes. So the place that I kind of changed my life that I mentioned, Hollyhock, a retreat center, it was one of the facilitators said that to me in response to a question I had to him about, you know, sure, there was hard things in my life, but I come from an immensely privileged background, just where I live in the world and, you know, other circumstances that make me a privileged person. So how do you wrestle with, I was asking him, how do I wrestle with trying to justify my privilege and also do good with it? And also being this playful at heart person and wanting to have a really good time all the time. And he said that to me, that we are all our ancestors' wildest dreams. And to me, I think about the women, like my female ancestors and the miscarriages that they had, or the deaths of children that they had, and other unimaginable hardships. And our ancestors endured those things because eventually their descendants would have a better life. And I have a wonderful life. There are things that are hard about it, but I have a wonderful existence that is full of playfulness and purpose. And I feel like part of respecting what I have been given by my ancestors is to, yes, do good, to respect the world around me and the other people, but to also have joy, to find laughter and fun, and to do that while I, respect the responsibility that I have as a steward of somebody else's future, but, to have fun.
Yeah. Well, I love that you speak to the ancestors, and who's to say in another time dimension that what you're doing isn't healing them as well, and also those yet to be born. We don't know what we don't know. So finally, one final thing, what would you like to say to imposter syndrome?
It takes a long time to like oneself, but if you can really like yourself and know that all of the actions that you take from a base level are towards what you think is right, then
yay, I love that. You're speaking my language, Elyse. Thank you so much. And thank you for being a guest on Wake the F Up. And I think you are someone who truly has and is waking up and putting your best self out into the world. And thank you for showing up today.
My pleasure.
You have just listened to another enlightening episode of Wake the F Up with Janet Hogan. To find out more about the breakthrough, guided way to get off the hamster wheel and seize a life of freedom and fulfillment, visit janethogan.com/podcast for access to the show notes and to learn more about Janet's breakthrough work. Just remember, finding your true path isn't potluck, it's a process. Until next time.